reform. We can spend money quicker, we can get that money out there and rebuild the roads and bridges we need today. So with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from West Virginia.
May we have a time check, please, Mr. Speaker?
8.5 minutes remain on the gentleman for West Virginia's time, and the gentleman from Florida has 7 minutes.
How much time you want?
All right.
Huh?
3 minutes to 4 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Florida, the distinguished ranking member of our subcommittee on railroads.
Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Ray Hall, for your leadership on this transportation bill. You know, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. When President Barack Obama came to the floor, he mentioned to the House that, you know, Republicans used to like to build some roads. Well, you know, it is a sad day of affairs in this House of Representatives, and really it's a sad day as far as the committee is concerned, because we used to have a process that was bipartisan. We worked together. Well, you know, we can't pass a transportation bill, and the only thing we passed was a new bridge for Minnesota, and we had to transfer 30 acres of land in one individual congressional district. But the leadership of the Transportation Committee of this House of Representatives can't find floor time to debate a piece of legislation that would create and maintain millions of good-paying jobs for hard-working Americans. Republicans refuse to work with Democrats in crafting a transportation reauthorization bill. They have cost us the opportunity to deliver much-needed relief to the states and to the traveling public. Certainly at a time when our nation's unemployment rate remains at 9% and adequate funding 6-year surface transportation reauthorization bill is critical, what our country needs is a surface transportation bill. But let me be clear. We don't need a 5-year bill with 2-year money. We don't need a 5-year bill with 2-year money. Transportation and infrastructure funding is absolutely critical to our nation. We know for every $1 billion we spend, it generates 44,000 permanent jobs. We need and deserve a long-term transportation bill. But the Tea Party members won't be happy until we are riding horses on dirt roads again. We need to pass the Senate Transportation Reauthorization Bill and add some sanity to this process and send the bill to the President that actually help the traveling public and put the American people back to work. I yield back the balance of my time to you, Mr. Ray Hall, and thank you again for your leadership on the Transportation Committee.
Gentleman from West Virginia reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire as to the balance of time on each side?
The gentleman from Florida controls 7 minutes, and the gentleman from West Virginia has 6 minutes.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I'll continue to reserve, and I would like to close.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield at this time to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bishop, who has introduced the other body's bill in this House. It's labeled H.R. 14, which is twice as good as H.R. 7. I yield him 2 minutes.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank Mr. Ray Hall for yielding. I rise in opposition to H.R. 4239, the Republican 60-day highway bill extension. As prime construction season begins, thousands of construction workers and their families will continue to struggle because our Republican colleagues would rather engage in hyper-partisan politics than put Americans back to work. Today's highway extension is yet another example of the failed leadership and absent policies of the Republican Party. Unlike the successful bipartisan efforts of Safety Lou, T21, and Ice-T that put millions of Americans to work and made our highways and transit systems the envy of the world, today's Republican extension merely allows the nation to limp forward, impeding our ability to rejuvenate our economy. Let me be clear. This extension does nothing to create jobs or provide certainty to states. It does nothing to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, and it does nothing to improve safety on our roadways and bridges. It's been 6 weeks since the Rules Committee approved the rule for H.R. 7, the Republican highway reauthorization that was drafted in the dark of night and was passed out of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee without a single person other than Chairman Mica having read the bill. When our Republican colleagues finally did read the bill, they too were struck by the overwhelmingly negative consequences for many of their states. The bill has been in limbo ever since. If the priority of the Republican caucus was to create jobs, they would immediately take up and pass H.R. 14, the bipartisan Senate highway bill that will save 1.8 million jobs and create up to another million jobs, supporting over 113,000 jobs in my state of New York alone. If the priority of the Republican caucus was to reduce the deficit, they would take up and pass H.R. 14, the only proposal in town that is fully paid for. If the priority of the Republican caucus was to provide certainty to the markets and the states, then we would take up H.R. 14, the 2-year Senate bill, and not the 60-day extension the House Republicans now propose. H.R. 14 not only passed by an overwhelming bipartisan majority in the Senate, 74-22, the bill enjoys 114 co-sponsors in the House.
Gentleman's time has expired.
30 seconds more.
For seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
As House Republicans continue to isolate themselves from the mainstream, America continues to wait for much-needed infrastructure jobs and the thousands of businesses they support. I urge my colleagues to reject this short-sighted extension of our nation's transportation programs and pass H.R. 14, the bipartisan Senate bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from West Virginia reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida. Gentleman from Florida continues to reserve the balance of his time.
Mr. Speaker, I'm honored to yield the customary 1 minute. Okay, I'll yield 2 minutes. No, I'll yield the customary 1 minute to our distinguished Democratic leader, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Pelosi.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman for yielding. I couldn't resist the opportunity to come to the floor to speak on the situation that we have before us. I thank the gentleman for West Virginia for his ongoing leadership in terms of bipartisanship and constructive legislation to rebuild America, which is so important to us. As has been the tradition, Mr. Mica will admit that this has always been a bipartisan effort. That is the history, that is the tradition that has served the country well. For the first time, however, the Republicans have chosen to do a strictly Republican bill, which our very respected Secretary of Transportation, who served in this House as a Republican, served as a member of Congress, as well as served the Minority Leader, Mr. Michael, as a staff person. So he has a long history of knowledge of legislation in the Congress, said this was the worst transportation bill he had seen in his 35 years of public service. And again, this is a field on which he is an expert. He said the bill loses jobs, the bill the Republicans want to put forth, H.R. 7, and it also diminishes safety. That is not a formula for a good transportation bill. Less safety, fewer jobs, losing jobs. And so we had an opportunity to support a bipartisan bill that has come from the Senate. 3/4 of the Senate, in a bipartisan way, passed it out. March 31st is the deadline in which all of this will expire unless Congress acts. And Congress is not acting because the Republican majority does not have its act together. Their no way or the highway attitude means no highway bill that does create jobs and promote public safety. And it's really so sad because in the tradition of our country, from the start, from the very start, Thomas Jefferson understood the need for building the infrastructure of America. He tasked his Secretary of the Treasury, Gallatin, to come up with a project that would expand into America, both the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark expeditions, and out of that initiative came the Cumberland Road, the Erie Canal, things like that. over time. And in that tradition, the Transcontinental Railroad and the rest that would come later. And then in our century, a Republican president, President Eisenhower, at a time of bad economic times, he went forward, took the initiative for the Interstate Highway Initiative, which was so important to our country. It was a security issue to unite America. It was a jobs initiative to build that interstate highway system, and it was about promoting commerce, connecting people, improving the quality of life. It was a great initiative, and it, too, was a bipartisan initiative. In fact, in the Senate, our friend Senator Gore, Vice President Gore, his father, took the lead on that legislation, distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, as we heard from earlier from a gentleman from Tennessee. So this has all been a bipartisan initiative. It's about rebuilding America, which is part of our reigniting the American dream, to build ladders of opportunity for people who work hard, play by the rules, take responsibility, can have a ladder of success to climb and then put down for others to do. And part of that is, A, make it in America, so that people can make it in America. B, and I get to this point, build America. Build America. Build the infrastructure of America. That means everything from the highways, the mass transit, rapid transit, high-speed rail, all kinds of technological infrastructure that we need with broadband and the rest. We should be, it doesn't have any political or partisan cast to it at all. It never has until now. And until now, for reasons that are very hard to explain to the American people, well, we have a solution, we have a challenge. The bill expires, the authorization expires March 31st. We have a bill that can be sent to the President in a matter of hours from this House of Representatives this day, instead of smoothing the way, the road to jobs. We have the Republicans putting up yet again another obstacle because they have not been able to get unity in their caucus on a bill that promotes commerce, builds America, promotes safety, and creates jobs, 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 jobs. So what are we doing, wasting the public's time with a 60-day extension? I support the leadership of our ranking member, Mr. Ray Hall, when he talks about why we have to do something better, something more important, something worthy of the concerns of the American people than a parliamentary maneuver that isn't going to produce anything. It doesn't even have anything attached to it that says, let's do this now so that we can do something better later. It has a bill that they cannot even pass on the House floor, their own H.R. 7. If they could pass that, they would. Their own caucus doesn't support what they're putting forth. So they expect the rest of us to cover for them. Well, that is a real disservice to the American people. It's a real disservice to the hundreds of thousands of construction workers who are out of work. This job in its totality and the jobs it would save and the jobs it would create, over 2 million jobs, and yet, instead of doing that, we have a tactical maneuver for God knows what reason. Everything we do is about time. It's about time. Shortening the time in which people have to wait for jobs. Shortening the times at which people will get to their jobs to and from. And it's about time that we put the American people back to work with passing the biggest jobs bill that Congress can ever pass, and that is a transportation bill. We have it right at our disposal. It's at Mr. Bishop introduced it as H.R. 14. We brought it up earlier today. The Republicans resoundingly voted against the Senate bill, and I understand it was a procedural vote. Now, on a substantive vote, why don't you bring that bill to the floor? Why don't you bring that bill to the floor? And I ask the question again to my Republican colleagues. Why don't you bring a bill to the floor that 3/4 of the United States Senate, in a bipartisan way, passed out? We all want a longer bill. This is the bill they can pass. This is the bill we should pass so that the President can sign it into law. Anything else is just a conversation. Taking action, taking the vote, that is what the American people expect us to do. So we can talk all we want. What the American people want us to do is to act. And so I reject 60 days when we can do something much better for the American people, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from West Virginia reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
I'd like to yield 2 minutes to Mr. Schuster, the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. I thank the gentleman from Florida, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to ask my Democratic colleagues, following up on the distinguished leader's question, but a little twist to it. Why didn't your side, when you had control of both houses of Congress and the presidency, why didn't you pass a bill, a highway bill? You had the votes. You could have done anything you wanted to. And in fact, the distinguished speaker that just spoke said that this is going to be the biggest jobs bill we pass. I thought your stimulus was supposed to be the biggest jobs bill we ever passed. It's amazing to me to come down here on the floor, and I have so much respect for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, but to hear this argument going around and round, and as I said earlier, there's amnesia on the other side of the aisle. You had control of Congress. The bill expired in 2009. You still had control of both houses and the presidency. You didn't pass a bill. And I'd also like to make note, if you look back in the history of the highway bill, we've never been in the financial situation that we are today. We've never faced the kind of debt that we face today. And what this bill does is it lives within our means. But it does more than just that, living within our means, which we should do. And I would add, Thomas Jefferson would be appalled if he saw the kind of debt we racked up today. He would be appalled by that. So we're living within our means, and we're streamlining the process. We are saying we can do more with less if we change the process. The Senate bill doesn't have the kind of reforms. What the Senate bill does is it bankrupts the Highway Trust Fund. It bankrupts the Highway Trust Fund. And then we even have a bigger problem 2 years down the road, or actually 18 months and maybe 17 months, probably 16 months by the time we get it passed. The Senate bill requires states to incorporate livability and smart growth policies in, as if the states aren't smart enough to do it themselves, as if the states and cities of this country can't figure out how they want to improve the livability of their cities. No, the federal government has to do it. The federal government has to insist that they do that. Look, I think that members of Congress ought to have the ability to direct where some of these funds go, but the Senate bill, what it allows are the bureaucrats. It allows the bureaucrats.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Gentleman yield.
30 seconds additional.
The bureaucrats in Washington will decide how the money is spent, not even the folks back in the states. The Senate fails to streamline the project delivery process, which we do. That will make us be able to, that will allow us to build roads faster. And time is money. Anybody that's been in business knows time is money. And that is extremely important to this. It discourages the private sector. No, I won't yield. You have time left, I believe. The Senate bill discourages private sector investment, and it increases the regulation. Like I said, this bill is a good bill. It's a solid bill. It's one that the people out there want to see, a 5-year bill, not a 17, 16-month extension.
Time has expired.
Thanks,
gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of the time. Members on both sides of the aisle are cautioned against referring to one another in the second person. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Time check, please, Mr. Speaker.
2.5 minutes for the gentleman from West Virginia and 3.5 minutes for the gentleman from Florida. 4.5 minutes, pardon me. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, member of the House Appropriations Committee, Mr. Oliver.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, America's whole economy depends upon the efficient movement of people and goods. A modern, well-maintained transportation network is absolutely necessary for our economy to grow and the country to prosper, and its influence on the economy is staggering. Our auto manufacturing industry and its enormous repair and parts supplier base, the national network of gas stations and its complex distribution system, and the oil industry itself all thrive because we have an efficient highway system that people need to use. The physical construction of roads and railroads requires aggregate materials processed locally steel trusses and rebar made by American companies, and crews manned by American workers. Our transit system supports the domestic manufacturing of buses, streetcars, and trains while providing businesses with cost-effective access to the labor pools. Furthermore, every good product produced or consumed in the U.S. must be transported via our network of roads, rails, and ports. As a result, the efficiency with which our system operates determines whether American goods can compete in the global marketplace. Unfortunately, the 60-day extension Republicans offer on the floor today keeps our transportation system bogged down in a state of uncertainty. It slows down ongoing projects by only providing partial funding. It jeopardizes a major part of this construction season in northern states by hindering and delaying their ability to determine how many projects can be funded. It shuts down the planning and design pipeline for future projects because they don't know what resources will be available. Consequently, this being the 9th extension since 2009, state transportation programs are being forced to move forward only with projects that meet the lowest common denominator. Mr. Speaker, if the Republican goal is to slow economic growth and keep unemployment high into the fall, this 60-day extension will accomplish that spectacularly. In fact, I can think of nothing—
Gentleman's time has expired.
15?
I
can think of nothing to—
expired.
I give the gentleman 15 more seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 15 seconds.
I can think of nothing that would be more effective at slowing economic growth and keeping unemployment high. Mr. Speaker, there is a better option. Bring them to the floor and let us vote on the Senate's multi-year bipartisan bill that was passed by a vote of 74 to 22 with majority support from both parties.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from West Virginia reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
I have no further speakers, and I would request the ability to close.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized for—
I yield myself the balance of my time. Mr. Speaker, to respond to the other side of the aisle about which party was in control when nothing was done or vice versa, whatever, as that side of the aisle knows, it takes so much to get the other body to agree on anything these days, to get the 60 votes necessary. It doesn't matter which party controls the other body. To get them to agree on something is difficult. So I conclude by saying vote against these delaying tactics, pass the Senate bill.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Speaker, I might just inquire as to the remaining time that I have.
Gentleman from Florida controls 4.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself that time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Well, unfortunately, this has turned into, I guess, sort of a political gotcha game. If this was a sporting event right now, the umpire would probably come out, throw down a flag, and say a foul has been committed. And it's kind of sad that the other side, that bipartisanship has become a one-way street. No one's worked harder than I have to try to accommodate the other side of the aisle. Let me just, Mr. Speaker, one of the former speakers said, refuse to work with the Democrats. That's not true. We took 60% of their recommendations, and one reason we took longer than I had hoped was to make certain that everybody had a fair, open opportunity. The process was completely open, and again, going to the ranking member's district with the first hearing all the way to the West Coast. In the amendment process, I told members that everyone would be heard and everyone would have an opportunity to offer an amendment. Yes, we sat for 18 hours. We took over 100 amendments from the other side of the aisle, and each of them was considered with respect and dignity that every member of this body should have before everybody. This is not true, and again, I just don't think it's fair. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Bishop, came to the floor and said that I was the only one that had a copy of the bill. In fact, the irony of it is Mr. Bishop, Mr. Speaker, and his staff, everyone, in fact, all the members were given a copy a week before, which is twice the period of time in the past. And copies of the bill were distributed from his office, which he also admitted to in committee long before the bill came to the committee. So, you know, the Secretary said this is the worst bill he's seen. And it is for bureaucrats. It is for people in those tall buildings in Washington, because we are consolidating programs. We've gone from 6 core programs to 130. We have offices that we don't need, duplicate programs, and someone is trying to actually do reform. Yes, we do substantial reform. They throw money at problems. We at least keep it level and we responsibly pay for it. But even when they threw money at things like stimulus that Mr. Schuster brought forward, 35% of the money, 2.5 years, was still sitting in the federal treasury because shovel-ready became a national joke, and it is a national joke because of the red tape, the bureaucracy, all by those people who may lose their jobs in those glass buildings right here in our nation's capital. So, again, I don't think it's fair. I'm disappointed. We tried to do a 90-day. The House is going to be out and the Senate is going to be out for 2 weeks for Easter. Then they come back, one body's out, the other body's out, so we're not here. They weren't happy with 90 days, and we tried to accommodate the 60 days. But this is a political game of gotcha, and it's unfortunate because there's many Americans who are counting on us for jobs, many people who lost their home, particularly in the construction industry. They don't want rhetoric. They want action from this Congress. And if we just had a cooperative effort on this and true bipartisanship, we could get so much done for the American people. So I'm saddened in a way, but I tell you, I've done everything I can to move this forward. For some of those people I talk to that don't have a job, that have lost their homes and their life savings, we need to put a few of them to work, and we can if people would stop the nonsense and move forward in a responsible fashion. And I just yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4239 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are... Gentleman from West Virginia.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays and hope the vote occurs now.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, and yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks on the legislation and to insert extraneous materials on H.R. 3309.
Without objection, so ordered. This one. Pursuant to House Resolution 595 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 3309. The Chair appoints the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
All right, the committee will be in order. The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 3309, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to amend the Communications Act of 1934 to provide for greater transparency and efficiency in the procedures followed by the Federal Communications Commission.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Eshoo, will each control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, the communications and technology sector is one of the most competitive, innovative, and open sectors of our economy. From fiber optics to 4G wireless service, from the smartphone to the tablet to the connected TV, this sector has been creating new services and new devices and high-quality jobs that come with high-tech innovation and investment. Now, despite a lackluster economy, wireline, wireless, and cable providers invested $66 billion in broadband infrastructure in 2010. The U.S. is now leading in the cutting-edge wireless technologies. If we want this to continue, though, we need to avoid needless bureaucratic red tape and fix broken processes at the FCC. Communications and technology companies and the public deserve a more transparent and responsive government agency. And that's exactly what the legislation before us now would accomplish, bringing transparency, bringing accountability to the Federal Communications Commission. The bill is the fruit of the Energy and Commerce's own open and transparent process. Last May, we invited the commissioners of the FCC to testify about improving their processes, and we heard from them about the process problems that have occurred at the agency when it's been headed by chairs from both parties. This is not about this commission, maybe about a prior commission, but it's about a systemic problem. In June, staff released a discussion draft, and we held a legislative hearing with a diverse panel of experts representing industry, think tanks, consumer groups, academia, and the states. We listened to what they had to say about the various ideas that were on the table, and we began to work to modify those ideas into something that was workable. In response to the views presented at the hearings, as well as additional input from stakeholders and colleagues on both sides of the aisle, we refined the draft legislation. Then in November, the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology held an open markup of the bill at the subcommittee level. Text is there. Everybody had a chance to see it. Everybody had a chance to work on it and amend it. Earlier this month, the committee marked up the bill, the full committee did, with several bipartisan amendments that continued to improve the FCC processes. So in large part, the FCC Process Reform Act asked the FCC to go through a process similar to what we just went through in the committee, on the Energy and Commerce Committee, to actually craft this reform legislation. And then we asked the FCC to implement the kinds of reforms that we implemented in this very House to avoid abuses that had taken place in the past. Now, the FCC regularly issues final decisions without giving the public an opportunity to even review the text that they're considering. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. They actually issue final decisions without giving the public an opportunity to review the text. We don't operate that way in the House, at least not anymore. The transition team that Speaker Boehner asked me to chair after the last election adopted a requirement that people have time to read the bill. A 3-day layover provision's in place in this House now so that the public has a chance to read the bills. We have a chance to read the bills. The press corps in the gallery behind us has a chance to read the bills. What's wrong with asking a federal agency that writes regulations that affect one of the most dynamic industries in our nation, what's wrong with asking them to make their text available? We do that in this legislation. giving the public, last October, let me tell you part of the problem here. Last October, the agency introduced more than 100 new documents into the record of its universal service proceeding in the last few days of public comment. Giving the public as few as 2 days to comment on thousands of pages of new data isn't right. These are some of the rafts of documents right here behind me in these binders. You imagine in 2 days you're supposed to evaluate everything there. As the President and CEO of the Wireless Association said, there are other elements of H.R. 3309, such as the provision aimed at preventing data dumps. This we would call a data dump. Right before an item goes on sunshine, that would represent significant improvements in the regulatory process. Sensible regulatory policies can contribute to the wireless industry's ability to continue serving as a catalyst for innovation, economic growth, and job creation. So we're trying to get the Commission not to do data dumps, to be more transparent. The bill would require the FCC to provide the public a minimum amount of time to review filings and comment on proposed rules. It is your business. After all, the agency ought to let you have a chance to participate. Now, unlike executive agencies, these are the ones under the direct command and control of the President of the United States, the FCC never assesses the cost and benefits of regulations. Not required to, so they don't do it always. They can, but they don't. Now, President Obama issued an executive order that required executive agencies to actually assess costs and benefits of every single regulation they issue. That's from the President of the United States. And his executive order requires a more stringent test for major rules. These are the ones affecting the economy in the area of like $100 million. The FCC is not one of those executive agencies. It does not have to follow what the President of the United States tells the other agencies to do because it's an independent agency. So everything the President's asking all the other agencies to do, in this legislation we're saying, FCC, you should do as well. Now, President Obama appointed a Jobs Council. How do we make America more competitive? How do we improve the processes to really drive economic growth? That Jobs Council called on this Congress last year to require independent agencies like the Federal Communications Commission to actually conduct a cost-benefit analysis before putting more red tape on industry. Go find out what it's going to cost to do what you propose to do. Now, I want to make it clear. We didn't require the FCC to do the more onerous test that the President requires. The bill is less onerous than his own executive order because it takes a lighter touch regulation applied to all regulations and applies it to the FCC's major rules. So we ratchet it down. We're not trying to overburden this agency. But if every other agency of the government can do a cost-benefit analysis and even do a higher, more sophisticated level, what's wrong with asking the Federal Communications Commission to do a light-touch review of costs and benefits? And you'll hear arguments that this is all brand-new stuff. It had never been done before, can't be done. By golly, we're going to litigate for 15 years. Oh, no, the whole world's going to end. Look, this uses language right out of President Obama's order. The bill requires for major rules, quote, a reasoned determination that the benefits of the adopted rule or the amendment of an existing rule justify its cost, recognizing that some benefits and costs are difficult to quantify. That's in our language. It's also in the President's language. Taking into account alternative forms of regulation and the need to tailor regulation to impose the least burden on society consistent with obtaining regulatory objectives. Virtually all of that language I just read to you is what the President of the United States has put as a requirement on the agencies over which he has direct control. We're saying the FCC is under our control as an independent agency. We're sort of the mothership for the FCC as the Congress. It's up to us to carry out these provisions. They're good public policy changes. The FCC has a substantial backlog that affects small businesses and consumers. 4,984 petitions, 3,950 applications are more than 2 years old. 2 years old. All across the country, people have been asking the FCC to take actions, to solve things, to come to decisions. They do it in a clouded, behind-the-curtain sort of way, and you sit on the outside as the public trying to grow jobs, invest, and innovate, and you wait. You wait. 2 years is a lifetime for an entrepreneur in the communications marketplace. My wife and I were small business owners for 22 years. We were broadcasters. We've been before the FCC and all. We're not in that business anymore. Been out of it since December of '07. So this isn't about me, except I've witnessed what you have to deal with. So I'm trying to fix it here. 1,083 consumer complaints are more than 2 years old. The FCC's done nothing on them. The bill requires the FCC, therefore, to set shot clocks for decisions so the public will know when to expect an answer. We don't tell them the length of those shot clocks or how they should be done. We're just saying, look at your workload and give the public a gauge of when you will reach a decision. You decide the decision. You decide how long those shot clocks would be, because you know better in terms of the management flow of your workload what's appropriate, but set some timelines. Set some timelines. In recent years, the FCC has leveraged its authority to review transactions to accomplish unrelated policy goals and insulate its rulemakings from judicial review. Now, what does that mean? It does through last-minute side deals with applicants that are often not disclosed until just before a few days or even hours before the FCC approves a deal. One problem with these voluntary commitments is they're not voluntary. If you're trying to get the FCC to approve your transfer of license, the FCC in recent years has used that approval authority to go way beyond any statutory authority they have to issue rules in an area, and they hold you hostage. Outside of the portals, we'd call it extortion, probably. Because what they do is say, look, we only have authority here to decide on transfer your license. That's true. Yeah, we're looking at that. But we want you to go off here and agree to do all these other things over which we have no authority to mandate you do them. We could not do a rulemaking if we wanted to because we don't have the authority under the statute to do it. But by the way, wink, nod, twist your arm. If you don't, and you don't call it voluntary, then you can probably kiss this merger goodbye. I don't think that's an appropriate role for the federal government. And nobody in this chamber should support that kind of activity. And yet, if you oppose this bill, in effect, you're supporting that activity. Now, I know there are some companies out there who aren't real wild about this because they see this as an ability to affect their competitors. Because they say, oh, that's great. We'll twist them at the FCC and we'll force them to do things the FCC couldn't force them to do on their own absent a merger condition outside of their regulatory and legal authorities, and we'll get a little edge in the market. We'll put our finger on the scale. And that's what happens. That should stop. Some argue we should not treat the FCC differently from other agencies. Well, in effect, that's what's happening today. Every other agency is being directed by the President of the United States to do these things we're directing it to do through this legislation. But because it is different, it is an independent agency, none of what the President's suggesting can be applied to the independent agency. Now, they say, well, we're going to do this on our own. Well, they may. And, frankly, the chairman of the FCC right now, Julius Janikowski, I've spent a lot of time talking to him. He has done some really excellent reforms. But the day he leaves and a new chairman comes in, all those can be wiped out. I think this needs to be in statute so we have good processes and procedures going forward regardless of who controls what around the FCC in the future. The FCC does act differently. Now, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, known as FERC, is a similar independent agency. But it doesn't operate this way. It actually puts the text of its proposed rules out for public to see before it votes on it. It actually builds its case before it makes its decision. We have an issue going on right now where I've asked the FCC to give me the document they actually voted on as part of this effort on the Universal Service Fund rewrite versus what came out the back end when they were finished weeks later. 751 pages of regulations. They won't give me the documents. You see, it changed behind the curtain. They circulate it around in private. They edit it. They've issued their press release, said, here's what we're doing, and then they change it. And then you wait. So the public doesn't have a chance to see what they're actually considering until it's too late and it's final. I think that's wrong. Both sides of the aisle for institutional reform at the FCC. Former White House advisor Philip Weiser said that the agency, quote, is in dire need of institutional reform. State commissioners have been calling for the reform of the FCC's rulemaking process for years. In fact, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, these are the people who are looking out for the ratepayers and the consumers. That is their job. Endorsed several provisions of this bill, including language that the actual language of proposed rule be published for comment. Specify a 60-day comment cycle. Mandate that all commissioners have adequate time to review any draft decision before voting on it, and on and on. This is good, solid government reform legislation. It does not protect the status quo. It does not say, the FCC, keep doing what you're doing it great. Because some of us came here to change how the federal government operates in Washington, to open up the process and make it more accountable and transparent. And that's what this legislation does. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition today to this bill, 3309. It's a bill that essentially guts the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, by requiring new onerous process requirements, which will result in an agency that is less effective, less agile, and less transparent, which is really the opposite way of where we all want to go. As the ranking member of the Communications and Technology Subcommittee, I support modernizing the FCC, and the Democrats on the subcommittee do as well. We want to enable the agency to operate with increased openness, with transparency and accountability. But unfortunately, this bill doesn't accomplish these goals.
Anna, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure her microphone's working properly.
Yeah, I didn't think it was working either.
Yeah, not to take any time away, it just does not seem to be on right where we're getting feedback, and I want people to be able to hear my colleague and friend.
Thank you. I thank the chairman.
Well, the gentleman from California is recognized. For the record, I've asked them to look into it as well. I thought I noticed it myself. So
maybe she should try the other microphone there.
I think maybe I'll come to this.
Yeah.
I think I hear my voice in it. Can you hear me?
No, it's not. Oh, wait, there, right at the end, maybe.
Why don't I use this?
There we go.
And Mr. Speaker, I would suggest we restore the time. I'm not sure it worked at the beginning.
We'll do that. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I thank the chairman, and I rise in opposition to 3309. Essentially, this bill guts the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, by requiring new onerous process requirements, which will result in an agency that's less effective, less agile, and less transparent. The opposite direction, I think, of where we all want to go. As ranking member of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, I want to thank the chairman for the work that he has done with us. He's always been very respectful, and the process, I think, has been a good one. Democrats support modernizing the FCC because we want to enable the agency to operate with increased openness and transparency, as I said. Now, but unfortunately, the bill doesn't accomplish these goals. Over the past year, our subcommittee has heard from countless industry representatives, administrative law experts, and public interest advocates. But there aren't any public interest advocates that support this bill, which I think in and of itself is instructive. Amongst those experts, and the chairman mentioned Phil Weiser, the dean of the University of Colorado Law School, who is often cited and implied that by adopting some of these proposed reforms is the way to go. But Dean Weiser tells us that, quote, passing this law would be a grave mistake. And yet, despite the feedback of a bipartisan group of administrative law experts who suggested that this legislation could tie up the FCC in 15 years of litigation. It's a real job creator for lawyers. The House is going to vote today on this, which requires unique statutory mandates that apply only to the FCC, altering the way in which the FCC reviews transactions and exposing the agency to new litigation risks. 3309 mandates that the FCC undertake a cost-benefit analysis of any rule with, quote, economically significant impact. This requirement ignores the fact that the FCC already takes into account the impact of its rules on small businesses. And to add insult to injury, the CBO estimates that if enacted, 3309 would cost $26 million and require the agency to hire an additional 20 employees to handle the new rulemaking, reporting, and analysis activities required under the bill. Now, the chairman has said, well, it's a fees-driven agency. Fees from businesses, fees from anywhere. It's still going to cost $26 million more and add more to the bureaucracy that I think the majority really doesn't have much affection for. For nearly 80 years, the FCC has operated as an independent agency responsible for regulating interstate and international communications by radio, television, wire, satellite, and cable. And by most accounts, the FCC continues to innovate and implement reforms. And the chairman was very gracious to outline what Chairman Janikowski has done under his leadership, including removing 120 obsolete regulations, drastically reducing the number of pending applications, and taking steps to increase transparency and stakeholder participation. So for all of these reasons, Mr. Chairman, I don't believe the 3309 is the solution. And that's why I'm urging my colleagues to oppose this legislation, even though there are some parts of it that I support. We need to ensure that the FCC's ability remains to protect consumers and ensure a competitive marketplace in the years to come. And with that, I will reserve the balance of our time.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, one of the original co-sponsor of this legislation, Mr. Kinzinger.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the time to speak on this very important piece of legislation. You know, having the opportunity to help lead the effort in committee and now on the House floor to get FCC process reform passed is something I'm passionate about, because I feel that this legislation will make great strides towards improving the predictability, efficiency, and transparency of the FCC and its operations. A common theme I've witnessed throughout my time here in Congress is that of bureaucrats coming up with solutions in search of problems. In terms of the FCC in particular, I feel that sometimes they do so without following a standard set of procedures, statutory law, or regulatory guidelines. I believe this can be seen in some of the recent mergers in which certain concessions have been extracted from concerned parties in order to push the wills of those at the Commission. This is not the way to run what should be an open and transparent rulemaking process. Government transparency is a major key to gaining the trust of the public, and this legislation will put into place some really common sense reforms. Key among those is telling the FCC that they must publish the specific text of proposed rules for all to see before adoption of those rules. They must also allow enough time for the public to comment on those proposed rules so that their voices can also be heard. I've seen that Chairman Janikowski has made some very good progress in implementing much of what's in this legislation. But the fact of the matter is that many of those efforts are done at his discretion and are no longer in place when he leaves. Statutory and regulatory authority should be what moves the decision-making process of the FCC, and I believe the efforts of this bill will put the FCC in line with the intent of Congress. I thank the Chair, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
At this time, I'd like to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman of California.
Gentleman is, how much time?
5 minutes. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and my colleagues, today the House is taking up H.R. 3309, which the Republicans say is a modest proposal to make the agency operate more efficiently. I could not disagree more strongly. This bill would not reform the FCC, it would disable it. The bill erects procedural hurdles that make it more difficult for the FCC to protect consumers. It strips the FCC of its power to ensure that mergers between telecommunication companies are in the public interest. If this bill is enacted, it would stymie the ability of the agency to do much of anything except produce reports for Congress. And although I have many problems with the bill, I have 3 major concerns I want to highlight. First, it creates a new set of procedures for the FCC. For more than 65 years, the Administrative Procedure Act has governed administrative agencies across the federal government. This bill creates a special procedural set of rules for the FCC alone. Let me give you an example. The bill requires the FCC to include in every notice of proposed rulemaking the specific language of the proposed rule. Although this should be a best practice, and the Genikowski FCC does it 86% of the time, it makes no sense to strip the agency of flexibility and require it to do it in every instance. Just last week, the FCC adopted unanimously a notice of proposed rulemaking on interoperability requirements in the 700 megahertz spectrum. It did this without including the specific language of proposed rules. As Republican Commissioner Robert McDowell stated, it made sense to refrain from including draft rules because, quote, putting forth proposed rules at this delicate stage may only distort the private sector's creative process, end quote. He added that the open-ended nature of the notice allowed the Commission to elicit greater insight regarding the costs and technical feasibility of potential implementation. Administrative law experts have ridiculed the provisions in this bill. One said, "Why would anyone want to tie the agency up in knots like this and subject it to endless challenges?" Another told us industry lawyers would have a field day challenging and delaying FCC actions. Other experts told us it could take 15 years of litigation for the courts to clarify the meaning of the new requirements in the bill. Even the Congressional Budget Office agrees that this bill would wrap the FCC up in red tape. According to CBO, the agency would require 20 additional staff positions to handle the new rulemaking, reporting, and analysis activities required under the bill. Secondly, this legislation alters fundamentally the way in which the FCC reviews transactions to ensure that they are in the public interest. Under current law, the FCC is directed to protect the public interest when reviewing proposed mergers. This bill would curtail this authority significantly. The bill strips the FCC of its authority to require merger conditions that promote broadband adoption, require minimum broadband speeds, require the repatriation of jobs from overseas, or ensure broadband coverage in rural or low-income areas. Conditions to protect smaller companies from harm could also fall by the wayside. This is not process reform, but a fundamental assault on the FCC's authority to protect the public interest. And finally, H.R. 3309 gives telephone, cable, or wireless companies vast new tools to tie the agency up in litigation for years if they don't like what the agency is doing. It does this by making all the regulatory analyses that accompany a regulation subject to judicial review. Well, if it's AT&T or Verizon or some other company that's subject to a regulation, they could sue the agency on the grounds that the cost-benefit analysis was deficient, or the analysis of the market failure was inadequate, or the agency failed to consider alternatives to regulation. These lawsuits, which no other agency in government would face, could effectively paralyze the FCC. We want to work, Democrats want to work with Republicans in the House to develop, ask for additional 30 seconds. We want to work together in a bipartisan way to help our economy and the American public and to make sure the FCC is doing its job. But we can't do this when the only proposals that are brought to the House floor would turn the FCC watchdog into a lapdog for industry. We should stop wasting time on ideological fights and start cooperating together. This will be another one-House-passed bill that will not go anywhere in the other body, will not become law, and for good reason it shouldn't. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank the Chairman, and before I yield to my ranking member or my Vice Chairman of the subcommittee, I just want to make a couple of corrections here, or at least explain things. Federal Communications Commission would still have the public interest standard that it has today to deny a transfer if it's not in the public interest. We don't take that away. We don't take that away. And on interoperability, the ranking member talked about this interoperability standard that the Commission is now taking up. Ironically, that actually was first raised as part of a request by some to include in the merger the AT&T Qualcomm merger. And instead, the Commission actually did the right thing, and in effect is doing a notice of inquiry. It says, before we do draft rules, let's go out and survey the marketplace and find out what the issues are. Then the next logical step is to come back with a notice of proposed rulemaking, i.e. the draft rules. This is what we are suggesting occur as regular practice as a result of this legislation. And now I would yield to the gentleman from Nebraska, the distinguished Vice Chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Terry, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker. May I submit that my friend that just spoke on the other side maybe was the victim of some poor staff